Hello everyone, welcome back to the Fascinating Womanhood channel. On our channel, we talk about everything that has to do with developing femininity and building strong, long-lasting, loving relationships. I am Sherry Lynn, and I'm here with my mom, Dixie Andolyn Forsyth. Hi.
Hey.
So we are tackling a subject today that we are calling vulnerable females. Is it good or is it bad to be vulnerable? Why are we talking about this today?
Women and men are both vulnerable in different areas, but we live in a time where a lot of women's vulnerability is kind of being denied, or we're thinking of it as something that we shouldn't have, and it's all bad.
Vulnerability is a bit of a taboo of a word. We don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to say we feel vulnerable. We just don't want to talk about it. And I think what's great about this video is we are going to talk about the good and the bad sides of being vulnerable and how important it is to understand this about ourselves. And if there are men watching, understanding this about women. Now, when we're talking about the meaning of vulnerability, the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. That's the kind of umbrella of what we're talking about.
All of us are vulnerable in many ways. There's times we don't feel vulnerable, but in reality, we are.
Yeah.
What do we do about it? How is it okay? Because we all are vulnerable in many ways.
Well, and on our channel, we're really talking a lot about developing femininity. And we, like we say in the beginning, we want to build strong relationships. And the vulnerability piece is a piece that we don't talk about enough. I don't know how many people out there are discussing this. And I think it is really important to discuss and not ignore, because a lot of us do ignore it and we need to understand it. When we're talking about vulnerability, because you touched on this, I think a second ago, we're all vulnerable. What do you think is the difference between when a woman's feeling vulnerable and a man feeling vulnerable?
Well, we both feel vulnerability, but in different areas. I don't think their areas of vulnerability are not the same. There's some overlap, but they're not exactly the same. And so understanding that is going to really help us understand ourselves and understand him, and where our vulnerabilities can be a strength for us and where his vulnerabilities can be a strength for him.
Mm-hmm. So what does this look like in the everyday when we're talking about men being vulnerable, women being vulnerable? Like, what might that look like every day?
It can be whether you are being attacked physically, you attacking somebody else physically, being attacked emotionally, or you attacking somebody else emotionally. Those are things that happen a lot with people. Now, I'm not attacked physically every day. Some people, you'd be surprised, experience this a lot. But emotionally attacked, a lot of women feel this. A lot of people feel this.
But I think it's important to point out that feeling vulnerable isn't just about feeling like someone's attacking you. It's about the fear of somebody potentially attacking you. I think that's important. If you're walking around at night in the dark, you probably, if you live in a nice area or walking in a nice area, you're probably fine. But that doesn't change that you might feel afraid and you might feel vulnerable.
And frankly, we kind of should. We have enough crime in our world that and I've talked to many women, they all tend to think, if I go to a big store at night alone, and I'm not parking right up close to the store and it's really dark, there's a certain feeling of looking around to just make sure you don't just feel totally safe like you would in the day.
Sometimes you have to be out in the dark. Sometimes
you do,
have to
but
walk
you
in the
still
dark.
feel it. Well, whereas, say, Bob, I've asked him, I said, do you ever feel like you look around more at night when you're walking from a parking lot to a store? He goes, no, I never even think about it.
So that goes back to the original question. What does that look like in the everyday? So for a man, he's obviously not feeling quite as physically vulnerable. I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but depending on the neighborhood and such that you live in, but where is a man feeling vulnerable?
Men feel vulnerable emotionally, and women do too, but men feel vulnerable as far as competence goes, about being put down as a man. Those are more their areas of vulnerability compared to ours.
Yeah, I think we both cross over with physical and emotional, but that's their spot that's a little bit more extreme or intense, is the emotional piece. We have that too. It's almost like the women are getting more of it because we have it really on both sides. We're emotionally vulnerable because we're sensitive, and we're physically vulnerable because we are the weaker sex, which I know
we are physically. It's a fantasy to say that we are not physically smaller and weaker on average compared to men of our same height and age. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we've kind of discussed what we're talking about, what the specifics are within the vulnerability and the difference between men and women, now we're going to get into a little bit more about the 5 kind of key ways that we are actually positively vulnerable, or you can see a positive spin on females being vulnerable and what you need to understand about it. Okay, so we're going to talk about those 5 kind of key points that we need to understand. Okay. The first one is physical strength. Now, that doesn't sound like a positive thing to be vulnerable about. So what do we mean by this being a good thing?
When we are physically weaker, that means we are less intimidating physically to men. We're less intimidating. And also when we're feminine, that inspires them and tends to make them more protective of us, which is a really good thing, because no matter what we do, even if we work out all the time, we are more vulnerable to our counterparts who are male. So how can we make the most of this?
So it's not always a good thing to be physically vulnerable, but you're saying there's a side to it that's good.
You're making, what can we make out of this that's good? Because we are physically vulnerable. So if you can't say, oh no, we're not, we're going to make it so that we're not. What's the best we can do with that? We need men and they need us. What we want here is a lifelong romantic relationship with a man that we love. And being physically smaller, weaker, we tend to be less intimidating.
Are you saying that women that are strong and like take care of themselves, they're still vulnerable?
Oh yeah. I mean, if that weren't true, we wouldn't hear about so many rapes and murders of women. Women are we just are more vulnerable physically. So denying it actually works against us.
So what do you think about the women that work towards being strong? Do you think that they are still vulnerable? Like, do you think that men still view them as vulnerable, even though they're working on being strong?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because men have them naturally 75% greater upper body strength. They have a lot more testosterone. We cannot compete with, I mean, you might compete with an 80-year-old man. We're not talking about that. The way to look at this is they're more likely, a normal man, not a violent criminal or abusive type, they're more likely to even be protective of us when they see our vulnerability.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, the second one is sensitivity/emotional strength. What does that mean?
We tend to find solutions. Like if there's something dramatic going on, a drama, men call this drama more than women. We just think, oh, there's people in trouble. And they'll say, I can't stand drama. Women can stand it more, and we know more what to do with it. Like, for example, say you have a child, and a lot of you do have children, mine are grown, but a child who is being bullied at school. You may notice, mother may notice he's more listless, maybe stays in his room more. Those are things that you notice because you're more sensitive. Dad may not even notice he's doing it at all. And so because you notice it, you can help kind of root it out.
So you're saying we are more sensitive than men, and that makes us vulnerable. But the positive spin to that is that we can impact different situations around us because we're sensitive. It leads us to notice more, be in tune with more. And we can break that down a little bit more as we get into this list as to like what that means. But overall, we are feeling more. We feel more.
Our feelings make us vulnerable, but they also are a great strength. And here's another example. Years ago, we had a neighbor that moved in down the street. They moved in from Alaska. So we didn't know them very well, but we lived on the same street. And one day they had a little baby, 18 months old, that she hadn't wet her diaper. And so she said, what do you think I should do? And I said, I'd take her in to the ER because that's not normal. Well, a long story short, the child died of pneumonia a couple of hours later. It was a tragic. And my mother-in-law happened to be visiting us at the time. And I said, what do I do? Because I didn't know her that well. I said, what do I do? I felt so bad for this couple. And she said, go there. You don't have, I said, well, what are they going to say? She said, you don't have to say anything. She said, bring something. In our case, we made cinnamon rolls. I brought her a pan of cinnamon rolls. And she said, using your sensitivity, you decide whether you say something or just hug them. And just go by the feeling. And whereas Bob would have probably, and he did, he thought, let's just leave them alone because they're suffering. She said, do something, go there. So I did. And I never forgot it. And I was so glad I did. And it was a pattern for me ever after. And this is when we hadn't been married that long. Yeah. Women are, because of our sensitivity, she knew because she'd lived longer than me, do something. Whereas Bob would say, what are you talking about? They don't want to talk to me.
Right. And I think a woman going over there to another woman, it says a lot versus a man going over there to another man. They might not know what to say to each other. Like you said, I don't know what they would say to each other. They probably don't.
I don't think they'd like Bob's cinnamon rolls. He would have bought some.
Some men are more sensitive than others, but yeah, I like, that's a really good example. So the third one is how we compliment men. because of our vulnerability, how we complement their kind of, I don't want to say insensitivities, but they're, in comparison to us, they're a little bit more insensitive. So what are we talking about there? Can you give some specific examples of us complementing them?
It's like we were kind of talking about before. We even things out. We make men, we help to make civilization more beautiful, more loving. Men don't always think of doing these things. You know, there were several years that I've gone with my sisters to a sisters reunion. What I noticed, they were about a week long. We come back, the men, when we're gone, they tend to be a little less civilized. Like the one sister found out she made all this great food for her husband, frozen. He didn't use any of it. He got junk food, watched movies, got out a bunch of candy for the kids, and kind of was, it was just a little less organized and civilized. We are a great complement to, because men without women tend to be to go towards a little bit of being a little less civilized. And by the same token, when the men a few years ago, they did a kind of a men's thing up at a kind of a hunting thing in the house that they rented. There was a bunch of junk food, and they left their dirty socks on the floor. Women are a great complement to men. They when they're good. I mean, we can have an uncivilizing effect too when we let ourselves kind of become uncivilized ourselves. But women tend to, because we do care, we have a civilizing effect on men, and we don't even realize it a lot of the time.
Sounds like this one has to do with us, just our overall capacity to care and love. And that's where it's coming from. And that because we have this capacity to care and love, even though some of us are perhaps a little harder on the outside than others, we still have it. And when we accept it instead of hide it, we are complementing them even more so. It doesn't mean you have to be, this mushy, gooey person all the time.
Not at all. we bring more order, meaning to life. And I asked Bob once, if all the women and we live in the United States, so we're going to pick on the US, if all the women in the US were taken magically, just them, not their children, to another country for 6 months, what do you think the United States would look? He said it would be a disaster. Men left with the children, with the houses, everything that the women do. You don't realize what you do until you imagine what it would be like. And would men be, how much more would they be disagreeable with each other, not getting along? Women have a civilizing effect, and we need to recognize it and count it as that vulnerability as being of great value.
Yeah. Okay, the next one kind of ties into the last couple that we've talked to, but it's just a little bit more specific. It is number 4, it is the morale leaders. We become the morale leaders. What does that mean?
We are, because of our sensitivity, we're more likely, and we're being agreeable. We want people to get along. We want people to have good relationships. We are more ones to help people feel better about themselves. We'd say it's okay and you're doing good. Men sometimes think it, but they don't always say it.
Or they don't always, they're not always in tune with a lot of relationships at the same time. Like when I take my son to the dentist, I'm always so amazed at the bedside manner of these men that do his teeth. Like they're just incredible with him, but they're not paying attention to the 6 kids over here that I'm paying attention to. And I'm thinking like, oh, that kid over there looks like they're nervous and they're upset, they're worried, and then this kid over here, I'm worried they're not doing that. And I think that's, there's just their job, of course, but I think it says a lot about how men tend to kind of approach relationships. They kind of, if it's their job, they might still be having a hard time multitasking. Whereas we can kind of, this kid's worried about this, or this person's worried about this. And while we're doing all that, there's this area over here. I just think women tend to be a little bit better at that because of our vulnerability of caring, and we're so sensitive. We were talking about earlier, we feel everything. Like we feel so much more.
Feeling stuff makes us suffer, but we have such a valuable thing to add. And I know Bob would say about the dentist, he had good bedside manner because he saw it as a task. He knew it was good.
Right.
Rather than because he was,
it's his reputation. And he knows, hey, when I do this, it helps me to be better at my job, and the mother notices. And not that he's being disingenuous, but I think I agree. I think he's seeing it differently than how I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it as I feel so safe, which is kind of silly. I feel so safe being here. I feel like my kids are safe here. And he's thinking, oh, really?
Well, he's probably thinking, when I do this, the children are more relaxed. It's easier for me to do my work. And so, get through it. I don't have to hassle with it. Yeah. So he's learned that.
Right. And some women may be a little bit like that, but I think we're talking generally. We always have to speak a little bit more generally here. And like generally, women tend to be these morale leaders. We can see when we meet up with our friends, we talk about relationships, we talk about families, we talk about getting together a little bit more. That's a really good one. I love that we talked about that one. Number 5 is our built-in nurturing. Not to be confused with mothers, and mothers are included in the nurturing subject, but we're not only talking about mothers. So what do we mean when we say our built-in nurturing?
Well, let's take it about women who are not doing it in a mother sense, but say at work. We're good at conflict resolution and helping people to, like if two people are maybe not getting along or threatened by each other, we're good at kind of mediating some of that stuff and kind of helping to build bridges between some of these difficult things. Where men, again, going back to that, I've heard my son say, I can't stand drama. And we don't think of it as, we just think, well, these are feelings, these are relationships. Right. And they'll say drama, which means I have to deal with feelings, and they're not as aware of them, they're not as in touch with them, and they just like, I can't stand this. Whereas we're good at it.
But the world has to have nurturing people, and there's nurturing men, there's amazing nurturing fathers, but that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about this need, this craving, if you will, to take care. It could even be an animal, it could be a plant, it could be, you feel this need to fulfill that. And some have it way more than others. Some people may not have hardly any of it, but I think majority wise, again, generally speaking, women have this need to nurture something or someone.
Well, women get involved and start organizations to help the homeless, the people with nothing, the orphans, they start these nonprofit organizations. Women are often either start them or at the head of them or just pour everything into those.
Animal shelters are usually started by
shelters. Women. Yeah, I just recently read one about orphans from Haiti, and some of the people who are really involved in that are women, and they're just absolutely dedicated, who have nothing to do with the politics.
But thank goodness that we feel this naturally. A lot of us do, because what would we do if we were all the same? Like if we were all kind of, I don't really need to do any of that. It's not really my calling. Like if we were all like that, what would our world be like? Like, what would our children be like? Would we have even very many children? I don't know. I just think it's such a positive thing that we don't really remind ourselves of, hey, it's a good thing that you're nurturing. It's a good thing that you feel this need to do this because it's part of our nature.
Women are the ones, I know in the Civil War of this country, women volunteered as nurses. They risked their lives because of that feeling of, I want to help people recover, men who are suffering, who've been wounded. I want to take care of them. And that kind of a thing is real natural for women. And so it's a vulnerability in the sense that we can get hurt easier emotionally.
So now that we've gone through these 5 kind of positive spins on being vulnerable, what it means and why it can be a good thing, let's talk a little bit about how women protect themselves from their own vulnerability.
There's several things we listed, and we'll go through them fairly quickly because they're pretty self-evident to me. One is we often deny it because we don't know how to deal with it. So we just say, there's nothing wrong. Women are just as strong as men. Women, we're fine. We don't need anything. And it doesn't really work. It maybe seems like it works, but then when it makes us actually more vulnerable if we pretend we're not. We don't take necessary precautions when you pretend.
This is where where I think about the extreme feminist message of like, we all need to be the same and I'm just as strong. You go to the movies and you see a woman randomly winning a fight over a man twice her size. That's what I think about when I think about that. You're denying the facts. You're denying
with stilettos. No, and they say, well, it's fantasy, but people, they're presenting us that way, and we can't really do that.
Well, it's dangerous to think those things. In my opinion,
it's very dangerous.
I think it's very dangerous to teach, especially the younger generation. You can kick a man's butt. You can win. I mean, maybe like you could if he was, like you mentioned earlier, he was a lot older than you and you're more fit. But the general rule is that you men, we're not gonna be able to do that.
We're not going to dominate. And an attitude I hear often today is, I can take care of myself. And someone says, don't you need someone to walk home with you? It's late at night. I can handle myself. It's not really true. But
even if you're fine, even if you can do that, because that's not as extreme. You can do that, but I feel like you still need to face the facts that it is dangerous. You still need to face that fact that facts here. You are vulnerable right now. Don't deny
you
it.
need
And
to
that's the
carry-
dangerous part.
Well, not denying it would mean you take precautions, you carry pepper spray,
Right.
you maybe take self-defense classes, so you minimize it and you recognize I have a disadvantage if one man, let alone heaven forbid two, should come on me.
I just
And
feel like that's so foolish to think.
it is,
It's
yeah.
one thing to say I'm fine, because you probably might be fine, but it's another to say I'm fine, like laughable, I'm fine. There's no way I could be in danger. I'm fine. Like
Yeah.
that, there's two different sides to that. And I think, like, because I used to work in a job where I had to walk at night and I felt fine, but I knew that I needed to watch out. And I think there's a difference between.
There's a difference. Just like Bob said, he doesn't even think about it when he walks from a dark parking lot. But you'll hear policemen do these shows on television when they say, do not do this, carry pepper spray. They'll tell you it's dangerous to walk through a dark parking lot. They'll say, park up close under a light. Yeah. So men don't think about it as much.
Yeah. The denial is really dangerous. That's a really important one. The second one is about finding strong men to marry who can be her protector in many things. So how is this protecting yourself from vulnerability?
When women who marry a man who's very protective of her, frankly, there are predators who look for women who live alone and they watch them, and they wouldn't do it if she was not all alone or if she even had roommates. But they don't do it as much when there is a man there.
So this is a positive one, because the first one was kind of a bad one. This is a positive one.
This is a positive one. Sometimes you do that. I'm just saying how women protect themselves, and denying it isn't so good. But this is what women do.
Right.
Not okay.
So you're saying that you're encouraging women to find a man that makes her feel safe. Is that what the bottom line is?
Or have roommates because living, and sometimes you have no choice, but you can take precautions. I know a woman who's a widow. She lives in a gated community and she takes all these precautions. She doesn't assume, oh, it doesn't matter. I don't have to lock my doors. I'm fine. She takes precautions and she has people that she can call if she has any problems. Go ahead.
So this also can include like a support system.
Yes.
If you're not married.
Okay. The next one is working. I know this may seem like it doesn't fit, but it actually does. This is how you feel. Working on your physical appearance. When women feel beautiful, they feel stronger and more empowered. So it maybe makes them feel less vulnerable. It doesn't always make them less vulnerable. It may be emotionally because they feel like they can handle themselves better. But when women feel beautiful, they feel more confident.
I feel like there's an exception to this. The women that have been abused. Women that have been abused, especially if it has to do with an attack of some kind, do not feel beautiful. They feel even more vulnerable when they're beautiful. Can you describe that kind of situation?
Yeah, there's different kinds. Women are not all the same, but this is and some women, to protect themselves, I'm glad you brought that up, they will deliberately not take care of themselves and maybe gain a lot of weight so that men will leave them alone. And they do that. And then they feel bad because they feel bad about themselves and they don't like it, but they feel safer. And both things are things that are not really true. They're feelings, but they're not really true. If you see what I mean, it doesn't really make you less vulnerable.
I know a woman that will not wear nice clothes or fitted clothes because she was attacked at a point in her life. And when men come to the door to fix things, or, they bring the doorbell, she always is very comfortable in these giant clothes. So do you think that she is protecting herself from vulnerability by purposely not looking nice?
I think she feels that way, but she feels that way. And then a lot of this boils down to how you feel. Let's say if a woman has been or is afraid of being attacked, she probably is less vulnerable to that if she wears big baggy clothes, no makeup, but some men will do that anyway.
But I think she's trying to, not to get too far onto a tangent, I just don't want to group that. I think that there's a large portion of women that have been attacked. This isn't just a sliver. This isn't just a sliver. No. I think it's important to address that some women have the opposite effect. I personally agree with you with the first part. I feel less vulnerable. I feel more confident when I look better. I just feel like I can handle, my self-esteem's better, but I know women firsthand that are the opposite.
True. And I recognize that, and I've seen it many times. The thing that I'm concerned about is it doesn't help their self-esteem. They don't feel really good about themselves. It's more like they're trying to put up a wall, which is understandable, but it doesn't really solve the problem because they end up not feeling good about themselves. It's tough. It's really tough. And some of these scars are like lifelong. Depends what's happened to you. I've seen it so many times, but if they recognize, because they don't feel good about themselves. they may feel safer, but they don't feel good about themselves. And our goal is for women to feel good about themselves and feel safe as much
I don't
as
know.
possible.
That's very arguable about whether or not they are actually safer. I don't know. I guess it depends on the situation, but I don't personally think that you're safer when you dress down. I don't know. I'd love to hear if there's any men watching, if they have any opinions on like how they
The
view
problem
that.
is there's men who don't care how you look.
I
There's
know.
awful
That's what I
guys
was
who don't.
thinking. Yeah.
They're
The
awful.
fourth one is take on masculine persona in appearance and manner to make us feel tougher. Oh, so this is the bad one. So this is this is a negative one. So something
Well,
we tend to do is we try to copy men.
Yeah, because we think, oh, we're going to be tough like them because they're not as vulnerable in the areas that we are vulnerable. So, but the thing is, men don't really buy it. And it isn't play to our strengths. So it doesn't really work very well.
What do you mean when you say copy men? Can you be more specific?
The way men dress, the way men move, the way they talk, the way they act tough. But when women try to act tough, they act tough in a woman way. And it doesn't fool men. They don't really buy it. But a lot of women are kind of confused because they're taught in this age of radical feminism that not verbally, but it's kind of like the impression is men have it better, so let's act more like men. Some women may not agree with that, but that's what I see.
I personally think this is the most common one, other than the denial. Maybe the denial and this one kind of go hand in hand. And I think this is the biggest one that I take away, is because I know so many women that are like this, that do not want to be vulnerable. They don't want that label on them. And they act, especially in the workplace. I've seen it a lot in the workplace. So therefore, in order for me to get that promotion or get that position I want, I have to be more like the guys. I have to be more like a man. I have to take that on. But inside, you're still the same. You're still, and I've seen it, and maybe you don't think you are, but inside you're going to crumble like a cookie when it comes to some of these things that you care about. And I've seen it, and there's nothing wrong with letting some of this show. I think that's the whole point of this video, is letting some of these things show can be really positive to the relationships around you and to your personal self-esteem. Yeah.
Don't play to somebody else's strengths. Play to your own.
And when I see women copying men, the first thing I'm thinking of, other than what you just said about dressing and talking like them, is just acting like them, being confrontational and competitive, raising their voice, being sarcastic. We go there. We don't, probably some of us might do it intentionally. Some of us might do it accidentally because we're just around a lot of men. But being one of the guys and getting into that it's making you.
It doesn't make you less vulnerable. It may feel like it for a while, but it doesn't.
No. The next one is seek independent economic and financial stability. So are you saying marry someone? What does that mean? It's very vague.
It's kind of an attitude. The thing is, you can do that. A woman can be anything she wants. She can be a professional. She can make tons of money, but it isn't, that alone does not really, makes us maybe less vulnerable financially. But it doesn't bring us the greatest happiness if we don't have the balance of relationships. We still don't eliminate our other vulnerabilities by doing that.
Is this a positive thing to seek financial stability, or is this a negative? I don't understand.
It depends. It can be both. A woman being financially independent can be fine, but the idea that to do it so that you don't need anybody doesn't really work. I think it can be a very positive thing. Women who seek to be less vulnerable by becoming independent and economically, financially stable without the need of anybody else. That can be, sometimes they don't have anybody else. That's it. Or they must do it. Being independent can, or at least feeling independent, can be good, but it can also have its vulnerabilities too. If you do it so that you don't need a man, you're not going to be able to eliminate all your other vulnerabilities by doing that one thing. But see, women don't always seek these things. Like, I don't take on a masculine persona to try and feel better because I don't feel like I need that. But if you use it in order to not be vulnerable in other areas, it doesn't tend to cover it all.
Got it. Okay. And then the last one is more agreeable. What does that mean?
Women tend to be more, they don't want people to feel bad. So they'll tend to not all women, but women tend to be more agreeable, and it's a vulnerability for us. It's also a strength. Because women tend to be more agreeable, they don't tend to push as hard as men do for promotions because they don't want to be rude. They don't want to be too pushy, whereas men don't really care. We tend to avoid conflict with people. I know I've done this so many times. If somebody's a bit prickly, what I will do is I will tend to be extra nice in order to, I don't want anyone to get mad. So I'll be extra nice in hopes that they'll reciprocate and be nice to me. And sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't.
There's a
And
lot
then
of
they
women that are not like that, especially in the workplace. There's a lot of women that are, like we mentioned earlier, they take on this need to copy masculine men. So what do you think about them? They are agreeable kind of inside and they're lying to them. Like, what does that mean?
There's different types. There's different types. So some women deal with that by being less agreeable, and some women, in fact, a lot of women try. The reason some women, there's been studies that have shown the reason some women don't get the promotions that they seek is because they're too agreeable. They don't want to overstep their bounds, and whereas men don't really care about feelings as much, and so they do. And it's being agreeable is a good thing. But in some situations, it's a liability, it's a vulnerability, because we
I have to say too, I know a lot of women that are really, I don't know how to say it, maybe abrasive in the workplace.
Yes.
And I know personally that they may be that way at work, but boy, they just at home or when it comes to sensitive topics, relationship topics, it's like they leave the office, the elevator door shuts, and it's all the tears. And, I guess the point in bringing that up is that you're still vulnerable under there. You're just putting on a mask of strength, which isn't always a bad thing, but I think all these things we've talked about today, allowing yourself to feel them and not deny them, like all the things we've talked about, it actually will make you a happier person and it will help you to feel a little bit more in control of how you handle things and who you really are at your core.
Not too many men get in the elevator and cry.
Right.
I
know I've done it.
They might be like, oh, brother, that guy's such a jerk or something like that.
I'm not saying that women should cry at work. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the women that you're probably watching this and going, oh yeah, I know women that are really tough. They're not like that. Well, you may not really understand what's going on when they're not at work. And I guess it's just the point bringing up here is just understanding these things about yourself is really valuable.
And understanding it about other people and being more, well, we're actually asking women to be maybe a little more kind and sensitive and not as judgmental about people who maybe have a little bit tougher exterior. You might see that person is tough as leather, when in reality, they may have, they are females and they may have those sensitivities that they have put a big block over because they got to survive.
I think there's a difference between having thicker skin and being tough as leather, as you mentioned. I don't think it's a bad thing to have thicker skin, and you can still be sensitive, but being tough as leather, I think that's taking it to a different place, and you don't need to take it to that place.
Women who, for instance, are journalists and have to get in people's faces and ask them questions, they've got to be tougher.
Well, this has been a really nice discussion. Thank you so much for all of your really valuable advice. And thank you everyone for watching. Dixie's books and workbooks are attached to this video. If you want to learn more about us, you definitely need to check out all of our reading materials in this video. We will attach those in the links below. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel, please give us a like and a subscribe so that our channel can grow and you can support us. We're here every week. We always have a new video come out on the weekends. So check back with us next time and we will see you then. Bye.
See ya.